In the 13th century, Italy was divided. Unlike medieval Europe north of the Alps, no dominant powers had arisen on the peninsula. Wealthy princes ruling over their local city was the preeminent form of state. These city-states were highly commercial, balancing the power of the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church with their immense wealth. Powerful merchant republics like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa each individually held sway over European politics. In southern Italy, the Kingdom of Sicily ruled. This balance of power across Italy was a fragile thing, and in 1228 it began to unravel as for the first time the Holy Roman Empire and Papal States met in battle during the War of the Keys. In the background of this war lived a young boy born in a castle to the most powerful branch of the Aquino family. The boy's father, Landulf, was a knight that lived in the Kingdom of Sicily, but was sworn to the service of Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire. During the War of the Keys, the 5-year-old Thomas was sent to Monte Cassino to begin his education. When he was 14, a battle between imperial and papal forces spilled into the abbey, and Landulf sent his son to the recently established university in Naples. While in Naples, Thomas was educated in natural philosophy, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music by Petrus de Bernet, Peter of Ireland. Little is known of Peter except what he taught Thomas. It was he that introduced Thomas to the works of the philosophers Aristotle, Averroes, and Maimonides. During his education, Thomas was introduced to the Dominican order, which was actively recruiting and only 30 years old at the time. At 19, Thomas decided to join. To say his parents were displeased would not say enough. The Dominicans had to conspire to evade Thomas's powerful parents, moving him first to Rome and then to Paris. During his trip to Rome, Thomas was kidnapped by his brothers on the orders of his own mother and forced against his will to the castle of Monte San Giovanni Campano. His parents held him captive for a year, trying to force him to abandon the notion of Dominicans. The politics of the war prevented the Pope from securing his release, and his brothers went so far as to hire a prostitute to seduce him. Thomas drove the prostitute away, wielding a flaming log as a weapon with which he inscribed a cross into the wall. After a year in captivity, Thomas's mother finally relented. She refused to release him. In her mind, the family's dignity could not tolerate a surrender to the Dominicans, but rather she turned a blind eye while he escaped through his window. Thomas was then smuggled to Rome and then Paris. In Paris, Thomas met the future Saint Albert the Great, then a teacher of theology at the College of St. James. When Albert was sent to teach in Cologne, Pope Innocent IV offered Thomas the position of abbot at Monte Cassino. Thomas declined, however, following Albert to Cologne. In Cologne, Thomas took up his first teaching position, educating others in the Old Testament. It was here that he wrote his commentary on Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Lamentations. While Thomas was quiet and spoke little, his peers thought he was slow. Albert the Great scolded the other students, saying, "You call him the dumb ox, but in his teaching he will one day produce such a bellowing that it will be heard throughout the world." After 4 years, Thomas returned to Paris, where he began an extensive commentary on Peter Lombard's Sentences. At the time in medieval Christianity, Lombard's Sentences were the seminal summary of all theology promulgated to that time. Now Thomas was an extremely prolific writer. Between 1252 and 1259, in addition to the commentary on the Sentences, Thomas published Disputed Questions on Truth, against those who assail the worship of God and religion, Quod Libellul Questions, a commentary on Boethius's De Trinitate, a commentary on Boethius's De Hebdomadibus, and Summa contra Gentiles, the book against unbelievers. At the end of the decade, Thomas left Paris so others could gain teaching experience made possible by his vacancy. He finally returned to southern Italy. There, Pope Urban IV commissioned Thomas to produce a liturgy for the new feast of Corpus Christi. In 1265, the freshly elected Pope Clement IV summoned Thomas to Rome to serve as the papal theologian. While in that role, the Dominicans ordered Thomas to begin teaching at a brand new experimental university, the Studium at Santa Sabina. Unlike other universities of the day, Santa Sabina was to be a specialized school teaching advanced theology. It was in this role that Thomas began his magnum opus, the Summa Theologiae. The Summa, undoubtedly inspired by Peter Lombard's Sentences and Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, was to be a comprehensive guide to all theological teachings of the Catholic Church, and suited specifically for beginners. As Thomas explained, a doctor of Catholic truth ought not only to teach the proficient, but to him pertains also to instruct beginners. Our proposed intention in this work is to convey those things that pertain to the Christian religion in a way that is fitting to the instruction of beginners. By the end of the decade, Thomas was ordered back to Paris to begin a second regency. A reason for this assignment was that Aristotelianism had become a powerful force in the universities. Thomas, ever a fan of Aristotle, the man Aquinas dubbed the philosopher, was not opposed to Aristotelian philosophy when tempered with Christianity. But the universities were becoming overrun by a school of radicalized Aristotelianism called Averroism. Thomas wrote 2 works reprimanding Averroism as incompatible with Christianity. While confronting this philosophical heresy, Thomas finished the second part of the Summa Theologiae. In the 1270s, Thomas was given leave to establish a new university wherever he wanted. Thomas chose to return to Naples. In 1273, Thomas underwent a mystical experience. He never explained exactly what happened, but suddenly after this vision, Thomas refused to continue writing. "I cannot, for all that I have written seems as straw to me." 3 months later, on his way to the Second Council of Lyon, Thomas struck his head on a tree branch and became seriously ill. On his deathbed, he prayed, "I have written and taught much about the Holy Roman Church, to whose correction I expose and submit everything I have written." 50 years later, in 1323, Pope John XXII canonized St. Thomas Aquinas. During his canonization, the devil's advocate objected that there were not enough miracles attributed to him. A cardinal responded, "There are as many miracles in his life as articles in his writings." St. Thomas Aquinas became synonymous with Catholic education. The experiment at Santa Sabina was highly successful. Today, the university is known as the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, also called the Angelicum. In 1567, Pope Pius V proclaimed St. Thomas Aquinas a Doctor of the Church, with a feast equal to those of St. Ambrose, St. Augustine, St. Jerome, and Pope Saints Leo and Gregory the Greats. At the Council of Trent, St. Thomas's Summa was placed on the altar alongside the Bible. In 1879, Pope Leo XIII wrote that St. Thomas's Summa was a definitive exposition of Catholic doctrine. The next year, St. Thomas was declared a patron saint of all Catholic educational institutions. St. Thomas teaches us, that is his feat, known as the common doctor, the teacher of all. To discuss everything St. Thomas taught would take years, but we can summarize one thing. St. Thomas reminds us that wealth does not make a man great, and loudness does not make a man wise. Rather, as Christ taught, he gave up his worldly possessions, power, and inheritance to follow God. In all the great work he did, he submitted humbly for consideration and correction. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us.